What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to another video. Today we are breaking down a recent rules FAQ that Riot dropped for Riftbound League of Legends TCG. It's a little bit confusing upon first read, especially if you're new to the game. So we're going to try to break down the really important takeaways in today's video. Let's get right on into it. Alright, let's take a look at the intro. Riftbound Origins FAQ. Hi everyone, it's been a little bit since we released the core rules, and in that time we've received really valuable feedback and helpful questions that led to some refinements and updates to the Riftbound rules. We have a full rules update coming soon, but we want you to know how to play your cards, so we're releasing this FAQ earlier than the rules update. This document has two sections: frequently asked questions about the rules and interactions you'll commonly encounter, and revised and clarified rulings about more complicated interactions and cards we reviewed since the original core rules were released. So we're not going to go through every single thing in this document. I will link it down in the description below for anyone who wants to read through it thoroughly, and I would recommend you do that. I'm going to go over the more complicated stuff, like for example, if we go down a little bit, section 1 FAQ, how do I score? If you've been playing Riftbound even a little bit online, you kind of know how this works. So we're going to kind of skip past this and get to some of the more complicated stuff. I will, however, go over this frequently asked question because it is a little bit confusing, and some of you guys may have actually not even encountered this in game yet. So this question says, what happens if units from both sides in combat survive, either because of cane or a stun? So if you don't know what stun means, if a unit is stunned, it doesn't deal damage in that combat. So if you have two 6-might units fighting each other, but one of them is stunned, the stunned one will not deal damage back to the other 6-might unit. And then in the case of Cane Unleashed, he says, if I have moved twice this turn, I don't take damage. So this is interesting to go over how this particular fight would work. So the answer is, in this case, both sides will still assign damage to the other side as normal. Stun units will not deal damage. Units will still die if they are assigned damage equal to or greater than their might, unless they don't die, for example, because of Kane's ability. Then, if units from both sides remain alive at the battlefield, any remaining attacking units will be recalled to base, and the defending player will maintain control. No score, though. So basically, if a fight ends in a tie where both units are not able to kill each other for any reason whatsoever, the defending player, the person who was previously in control of that battlefield, remains in control of that battlefield, and the attacking unit is brought back to the controller's base. Very, very good to know for when this ever comes up if you're playing like a Leona stun deck or something purple with Cane. Here's another important one, really important for anyone who wants to play Darius or any Legion effect for that matter. Do I get my Legion effect when I play a token or use an ability? No, Legion will only be activated if you've played a card this turn. Tokens are not cards, and abilities aren't either. So you have to keep in mind that you have to play a fresh main deck card to your base, or play a spell, or play a gear, something like that. Tokens don't count, and only activating abilities on cards that have already been played don't count towards Legion either. Important side note, hiding does not count towards Legion either, because hiding a card is specifically not playing a card. When you flip the card later on, that is playing it, but hiding it initially doesn't count as playing it. Here's another really important one, especially for any of you guys that may come from Yu-Gi-Oh! So this question says, I have a reaction spell. Can I play it at the end of my opponent's turn? So if you come from Yu-Gi-Oh!, you might be used to a scenario where at each phase, both players get an instance of priority to activate any appropriately timed cards. Doesn't work like that in Riftbound. So the answer is no. The only time you can do this is if another ability triggers at the end of your opponent's turn, such as the Darkchild Annie starter legend, which says untap 2 runes at the end of your turn. Basically, as the non-turn player, to activate a reaction, you have to have something to actually react to. So the wording on reaction isn't completely true where it says you can activate this at any time. You have to be able to basically add it onto a chain or use it within a showdown. Very, very important to know that if your opponent just wants to dodge your reactions, as long as they can go through their turn or go through the phase without activating a triggered ability, you're not going to be able to react. Very, very important to know. Here are a couple things that I actually wasn't aware of. Maybe these are actually within the full, almost 100-page rule set that they have out currently, but it's good to have it here in the FAQ. It's a little bit easier to digest. Is there a maximum hand size? No, you can have any number of cards in your hand. Is there a maximum number of units I can have in my base or on a battlefield? No, you can have any number of units in a location. This is a great one. What happens when I run out of cards in my main deck? If you run out of cards in your main deck, then you need to draw one, like on your next turn, let's say. You will burn out. This is a game mechanic. This means you take your trash, recycle it into your deck, shuffle, and then choose an opponent to score 1 point. This is so fantastic. I absolutely love Riot for this because mill is the most annoying thing to play against in any TCG, and mill could still be like a strategy in this game if they ever decide to make an archetype that mills, but they don't win as soon as they deck you out. They just score a point. So whenever they do print like a mill archetype, it's probably just going to be part of a greater scheme of what that deck is trying to do. It's not necessarily going to be all in on mill, because you would never really be able to mill your opponent out enough times to score that many points in a timely manner unless the cards they print are absolutely ridiculous. So I love this. Super shout out to Riot for this one. Then the rest of this answer is, if you have no trash to recycle when you burn out, you'll grant an infinite number of points and pick an opponent to win the game. So this is a scenario that I don't see really happening all that often unless your opponent is somehow banishing your cards instead of actually sending them to the trash. So I guess if they wanted to create a mill deck that banishes off top of your deck instead of sending them to the trash, I guess they could win by deck out, but hopefully Riot doesn't have any plans to do that. Let's cross our fingers on that one. All right, this is where we get to some really important and honestly a little bit confusing new rules and clarified updates. So we're going to go over this stuff, and I'm going to try to give you guys examples for how this could practically be applied to your games. So there's a lot here on cards that tell you to play other cards. Let's read the question here. What happens when a card like the Harrowing instructs me to play another card during its resolution? Do I play it while the other spell or ability is still resolving? And what if I can't play it? So to clarify the timing of these and other effects, we're introducing the idea of pending items on the chain. When you play a spell or use an ability, they will be pending until you finish the steps of playing them before priority passes. When a spell or ability instructs you to play a card or play a token, or when a triggered ability has its trigger condition met, during the playing or resolution of another card or ability, you'll perform the very first step of playing that card or using that ability by putting it on the chain, then stop. So that means you don't pay costs yet, you don't tap runes, it's just pending until the spell that called that card, the spell that is saying play this additional card, fully resolves. Very important there. This chain item is still pending for now. You'll then process the rest of whatever is currently happening, including putting any other pending items on the chain above it. This is extremely, extremely important because this means, at least from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, this means that resolving effects cannot be interrupted. If you play Harrowing, you fully resolve the entire ability and the entire cost of the Harrowing before any card can interrupt. You cannot interrupt a resolving card. This is very, very important for proper procedural play and rules and card text going forward. Extremely important to know. If we read further, then in the order the items were put on the chain, each pending item's controller goes through the other steps of putting it on the chain, make choices, pay costs, and evaluate legality. Only then is the pending item considered to have entered the chain. So after the Harrowing fully resolves, whatever card the Harrowing is going to play, now you pay the costs after the Harrowing is fully resolved, and then resolve any abilities or start to create the chain for any abilities that that unit might have. Once all pending items are done being fully added to the chain, play continues, and any items that remain on the chain can be reacted to. This is another thing that's going to be different for my Yu-Gi-Oh players out there. You can add effects to resolving chains in this game. So at any point in a chain, let's say a 2-cost 1-power spell is on the chain at that particular point in the chain, someone can defy even if there were chain links that resolved before that. There's seemingly not going to be any quote-unquote chain blocking in this game. They call it a chain, but from my understanding, it's quite a bit more like the stack in Magic than it really is like a chain in Yu-Gi-Oh! If at any point during that process that player is unable to proceed with playing the pending chain item for any reason, the item is removed from the chain, and if it's a card, is put back where it came from. This won't happen very often. If you start the process of playing a card, you'll almost always be able to legally finish it, but it's a necessary failsafe to handle corner cases. Let me give you an exact example of this, again, from my understanding. So instead of using the Harrowing, let's use Spectral Maiden as our example, right? Let's say that you are the player playing Spectral Maiden, and let's say your opponent has a reaction like Shakedown, okay? So myself as the player playing Spectral Maiden, I pay my cost for Spectral Maiden, and I choose to play Cruel Patron in my trash with Spectral Maiden's effect. The Cruel Patron is going to go into pending, but it's not going to resolve quite yet. My opponent is going to have a chance to react to my Spectral Maiden's triggered ability with something like a Shakedown. So, from my understanding, the way this would resolve is going backwards. The Shakedown will resolve. Let's say I'm stupid and decide to deal 6 damage to my Spectral Maiden. That Spectral Maiden is going to die, and I was trying to play a cool Patron that requires a unit to be killed as an additional cost to play this card, and if Spectral Maiden was the only unit I controlled, the Cruel Patron is going to fail to play. It's not going to enter the chain from pending, and it's going to stay in my trash. That's how I understand it to work, at least. And honestly, it makes sense, because in that reaction, my only way to play Cruel Patron by paying the cost has left the board. But if this was another unit that did not have such a requirement, the card should enter play no problem from pending after the Shakedown and the Spectral Matron resolve. Now, hopefully that all makes sense so far, but here's where we get into some pretty tricky and honestly complicated territory, because we're now dealing with erratas. So let's read the next question. What about cards like Blind Fury and Promising Future, which let players look at or reveal cards from the top of a deck, play one, and recycle the rest? If I can't play that card, where does it go? It sounds like it's too late for it to be recycled as part of the rest. They say, hey, you're pretty sharp. For most cards that let you play something, it's easy to put the card back where it came from if you can't play it, like in our example of Spectral Matron. The Harrowing would put the card back in the trash, Ava Achiever would put it back in your hand, and so on. But when the card came out of a deck, which is both secret and randomized, it's not so simple. To provide a clear and easy answer to this question, 4 cards in set 1 that let you play other cards from decks are receiving an errata. An errata, for those of you that don't know, is a change to the card text that unfortunately isn't going to be on the cards at the actual set release. You're going to have to kind of just know this, and hopefully people at your LGS, wherever you decide to play Riftbound, are going to be able to inform you of this in a respectable manner, because it's not really easy to know, especially if you're brand new getting into a game. So they continue to say, these cards that have been errated will banish the card before instructing a player to play it. If the card can't be played for any reason, it just stays banished. This is a small functional change, but it's one we feel is well worth it to avoid the fuss of getting these cards back into a deck somehow. So this would pretty much apply the same with our Cruel Patron example, right? If we're playing a Cruel Patron off any of these cards that have been errata that we're going to read, and somehow the unit we were going to tribute to play Cruel Patron is removed from the field, we can no longer pay the cost of Cruel Patron, so it's going to stay banished instead of actually getting put back into the deck. I don't know if this is like a super necessary rule change. I feel like it wouldn't be that hard to just say, okay, put the Cruel Patron on the bottom of your deck, because there's no shuffling in Riftbound, so having it put to the bottom seems like it would just make sense to me, but this is the decision and the way they decided to go with it. So taking a look at Baited Hook as our first example, the cost is the same. You know, tap 1, pay a yellow rune. It says kill a friendly unit. Look at the top 5 of your main deck. You may banish a unit from among them that has might up to 1 more than the killed unit and play it, ignoring its cost, then recycle the rest. So the part about banishing the unit, that's the new part. The original card doesn't actually say that. So it's going to be important to know about these erratas. These cases where the card would stay banished, or the card would even need to be banished in the first place, are going to be extremely, extremely rare, but it is important to know. These are the cards that have been errata: Baited Hook, Blind Fury, Dazzling Aurora, and Promising Future. An easy way to think about it, basically, if the card plays a card from a deck or a secret area, generally it's going to banish before actually playing the card. Speaking of playing cards from secret areas, let's talk about Nocturne the Horrifying, because this card is quite a bit complicated due to how it's worded and how it's intended to work. So let's take a look at the question. Okay, so what about Nocturne? How does this ability work? Is it a triggered ability? Can I use it if I reveal, quote unquote, reveal him, or only if I look at him? Because there are cards in the game that say reveal and some that say look at. So let's see what they say. Nocturne has a few problems we'd like to address. His ability is worded like a trigger ability because it says when, but it can't really work like one. By the time a triggered ability could go on the chain, be reacted to, and resolve, you wouldn't be looking at Nocturne anymore. And we know that to be true because you can't interrupt resolving effects with other effects due to the whole chain processing and pending chain items that we talked about before. So this makes sense. He has the same problem that the above cards do. You're trying to play a card from a deck, in this case Nocturne himself, and it's hard to put him back there because if you try to play him, but you can't for some reason. He's intended to be usable anytime you're looking at the front faces of cards from the top of your deck, whether the effect in question says look at or reveal. So in this case, look at or reveal are the exact same thing. The rules will be changed to clarify that last one. They will now explain that to reveal means the same thing as allow all players to look at. Nocturne's receiving an errata to solve these problems and bring him in line with his intended function. This errata makes it clear that his ability is not a triggered ability, and it uses banishment as a holding zone. It also specifies that revealing and looking both count, although we are handling that part at the rules level. We also want text to reflect it unambiguously. So his errata is going to say, as you look at or reveal me from the top of your deck, you may banish me. If you do, you may play me for a power. So they go on to explain how this would work with the example of stacked deck. The process starts as you look at or reveal cards from the top of your main deck due to an effect. Let's use stacked deck as an example. You play stacked deck, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, Nocturne is among them. You now get to choose whether to banish him or not, but you're not paying the cost yet. If you choose to banish him, you immediately begin the process of playing him from banishment, placing him on the chain as a pending item. Then you continue resolving stacked deck, selecting whichever card you want to put into your hand and recycling the rest that you choose not to take. Then, since stacked deck has finished resolving, you'll finish the steps of putting Nocturne onto the chain from banishment by paying the power cost instead of his base cost. So it's kind of confusing, but you're sort of interrupting stacked deck just to put Nocturne in banishment, which is the area where his play is going to be pending on the chain. So you just put him out there, kind of letting your opponent know, like, yes, this effect is going to add to the chain once stacked deck is finished resolving, but you got to put him in a public area so your opponent knows that you hit the Nocturne in the first place, basically. And then if for any reason you're not able to play him, he'll just stay banished. That's the whole reason they're adding this, like, banish before play for cards that come from a secret area. There are some other errata cards on this list you're going to want to know about for your own personal information. I don't feel the need to go over them here. I do, however, want to get ahead to targeting, because this has been a really contentious point for a lot of cards and abilities in Riftbound, because honestly, it's just not super clear what targets, but this FAQ aims to clear that up. So let's take a look. Question: some spells and abilities require choosing units, gears, or other things for them to affect. The rules say some of these choices are made when I put the spell or ability on the chain, but it seems like some of them can't be or shouldn't be. How do I know the difference? Riftbound uses a set of contextual rules rather than specific words on cards to determine which choices are made as a card is played. When a spell or ability chooses something else to affect, the rules refer to those choices as targets. Targets must be chosen as a spell or ability is placed on the chain, and they must still meet all targeting requirements as the spell or ability resolves. The next version of the rules will have more rigorous guidelines on which choices are targets, which we'll summarize here. For the most part, these rules don't change what choices are targets, they just spell it out more. So they clarify that an object or player mentioned in a spell or ability is a target if all of the following are true. 1, something publicly visible to all players. So that seems like you wouldn't be able to really target something in someone's deck, but a unit in a base or a rune even could be a target. 2, that you and you alone choose. So in the case of like maybe Call of the Week, your opponent gets to choose one of their own cards to kill, so you're not targeting that in essence, at least from what I gather from this. 3, that isn't a part of a targeting restriction, cost, trigger condition, replacement effect, or an action that must be taken. This is the most confusing part of this. Hopefully we'll be able to break it down in just a little bit. This explanation sounds complicated, but in general, most things that are affected by a spell or ability are targets. For a more precise breakdown of what each of those entails, see the appendix. Alright, so these new rules add an update specifically to charms. So the question is, as I play charm, I have to say not only what unit I'm moving, which was how it worked previously, but also where I'm moving it to. And the answer is yes. This is a change from prior rulings. This means that move effects that don't mention a destination, like charm, work the same way as those that do, like Showstopper. Showstopper says buff a unit in your base, move it to a battlefield. Even though charm doesn't say specifically where to move it, you have to declare where you're moving it at the time of activation before resolution, which gives your opponent more information in terms of how they may want to react by literally playing a reaction to charm if applicable. If a spell has multiple targets, like back-to-back, do I need to choose targets for all of them to put the spell on the chain? This gets into a rule that says spells can only be activated if you are able to actually fully resolve whatever that card is telling you to resolve. And this specifically says give 2 friendly units each +2 might this turn. It doesn't say give 1 or 2, and it doesn't say give up to 2. So the answer is yes, you must choose 2 different friendly units to play back-to-back, although it still resolves even if one or both of its targets are no longer valid when it resolves. So at the time of adding it to the chain, you have to have 2 units that you could give +2 might to. But if one of them dies via a reaction or something, you're still going to resolve back-to-back as much as you can. It's just that to initially use the card, because there's nothing optional about it, you have to have the 2 initial units at the time of activation. The next question says, what about triggered abilities with multiple targets like Sona Harmonious, who chooses 4 of your runes to switch to ready? The same is true of triggered abilities with multiple targets. For triggered abilities, however, this causes some cards, Sona in particular, to work in unintended ways. Going forward, we'll put the words up to on most triggered abilities. In the meantime, several cards are receiving an errata so that their triggered abilities behave intuitively. So I guess before, the way it would work is if you could not ready exactly 4 runes, you couldn't ready any runes, which is a really rough way to use Sona. So they are updating it to say, at the end of your turn, if I'm at a battlefield, ready up to 4 runes. So you can ready as many or as little up to 4 as you want. Targon's Peak is also getting a very similar revision, ready up to 2 runes at the end of this turn. Here's another very important one that has to do a little bit with the targeting that we talked about before, but it also has to do with like abilities inside of abilities on card text. So let's take a look at what they say here. Dragon's Rage. Dragon's Rage also seems a little confusing under these targeting rules. What do I have to choose as I play it? They say Dragon's Rage works a little better now that move destinations are chosen at the same time as targets, but it's still kind of strange. Accordingly, it will receive an errata with a new template for reflexive triggers, triggered abilities within another spell or ability that create a new ability that goes on the chain separately from the original spell or ability. This is extremely key to understand. To show you what that looks like, here's the updated text. Dragon's Rage revised text, move an enemy unit, stop. That's the first ability. That's the first thing that goes on the chain. Then do this. After that, chain resolves. This is what starts the new chain after then do this. Choose another enemy unit at its destination. They deal damage equal to their mights to each other. So to recap, chain 1, move an enemy unit. If there are no reactions, nothing else like that, that chain resolves. Then new chain, then do this. Choose another enemy unit at its destination, then deal damage equal to their mights to each other. So now we have cards, and I guess technically we already had this. They're going to clarify that in just a little bit. We now have cards that have multiple chains happening as the process of resolving them when they specify things like then do this : Falling Star and Acathian Rain and Twisted Fate Gambler are cards that were actually already worded like this, but I don't think many of us really understood, or even before this FAQ, I don't think it was even a thing where they would go on the chain separately as you resolve each instance of their effect. So Falling Star, initial activation, start stone chain. Then do this twice. Those both also have their own instances of chains, which can be reacted to separately as different instances, which is going to make things a little bit more complex, but for most practicality of play, shouldn't be too big of a deal. But if you want to be competitive at this game, you really should understand at which point chains are starting and at what point you can activate reactions. It's going to be very important to understand. Another really important card to talk about here is Tide Turner, because we all know, or for the most part know, that with Hidden, when you hide something at a battlefield, it's only really meant to affect whatever is at that battlefield that it's hidden at. But Tide Turner, with its card text and the way we understand it to be intentionally used, doesn't really work with those rules. So what do the hidden changes mean for Tide Turner? They're also clarifying some rules on Hidden for us. So the question is, when you play a card from Hidden, it gains several additional restrictions. The rules were somewhat unclear on this. So they say a hidden unit must be played to that battlefield if able. So if you hide a unit at that battlefield, you have to play it there, not at your base. And then it says if a hidden spell or a play effect of a hidden permanent chooses any targets, those targets must be chosen from among options at that battlefield unless the ability explicitly restricts targeting in a way that makes this impossible. If a hidden spell or a play effect of a hidden permanent causes you to play a unit, you must choose to have that unit enter the board at that battlefield. So now we go to Tide Turner, which we all know from the way that it was intended to work was very, very confusing with the way that we understood hidden to be, where it would only target or affect things at that battlefield. So Tide Turner, what do the hidden changes mean for Tide Turner? It seems like I'm supposed to be able to choose a unit at another location. Tide Turner is receiving a minor errata, both to restrict its targeting to a unit you control and to make sure that it can target a unit at another location under these rules. So the revised text will say, when you play me, you may choose a unit you control at another location. Move me to its location and it to my original location. So the way this is specifically worded, it just trumps basically the rules of hidden, where it's specifically telling you choose a friendly unit at another location. The choosing another location and the modifier of here that hidden provides just doesn't make sense with each other. So generally card text is going to trump game rules. That's going to go for pretty much all games. There's also another really big update for Zhonya's Hourglass. So what about Zhonya's Hourglass and Stand United? When they're played from hidden, are their effects restricted to the battlefield where they were played? This says only effects that choose are restricted. Zhonya's Hourglass saves the next friendly unit that dies anywhere. This is a replacement effect. Stand United can only give a buff to a unit at the battlefield where it was hidden, but its other effect, which causes buffs to grant additional bonus, applies everywhere because it doesn't choose anything. This is a change from previous rulings on these cards, intended to simplify the question of what hidden cards can and can't do. Zhonya's Hourglass now has additional rulings and a minor errata related to saving dying units. See below. So basically what there is to understand, specifically effects on hidden cards that choose have the modifier here added when you hide those cards. But in the case of cards that don't choose, like the additional buff on Stand United or the replacement saving effect of Zhonya's Hourglass, those can be used at any location, any battlefield. This is a really important thing for Zhonya's in competitive play because you can play it in your base for 2 energy if you don't want to recycle any power. And the previous thought was, okay, I'll hide it at my battlefield, but I can only save units at this battlefield. There's kind of like that trade-off there. Now, if you don't have 2 energy to pay for Zhonya's, but you still want to protect like anything on your board, you can go ahead and hide it at a battlefield you control for the 1 power. And if a unit in your base is going to die, you can still flip Zhonya's in your battlefield and save the unit at your base. That's a very, very important ruling to understand for competitive Riftbound. And for some quick updates to Zhonya's Hourglass and the Boss, both of which are replacement effects that save units from dying by resolving something alternatively, they both now say heal the unit, exhaust it, and recall it, because it wasn't clear before if the unit would be saved, whether it would keep any damage assigned to it, or if it would heal upon coming back to base. The answer is now that it is going to heal, it's going to be exhausted, and it's going to be recalled to base. Here's another ruling that I personally don't love, but it's going to be very, very important for us to all understand once again when we introduce sideboards and competitive Riftbound. So this is the section that says dealing damage with spells and abilities. Unyielding Spirit. The question is, what counts as spell and ability damage? What does this card do? Spell and ability damage on Unyielding Spirit is meant to encompass damage dealt by spells and abilities, but not damage dealt by other things as a result of spells or abilities. It will receive an errata to clarify this. So what does this card do? Most spells and abilities that deal damage just say deal 3 or similar. Think of like Hextech Ray, for example. Unyielding Spirit stops damage from all such spells and abilities, also like Singularity. Other cards, though, specify a source of the damage. Damage dealt by spells is damage that a spell instructs you to deal without specifying that some other object deals it. Damage dealt by abilities is damage that an ability instructs you to deal without specifying that some other object deals it. So if you guys have been playing Riftbound for a bit, the first thing you should be thinking about is Challenge or Carnivorous Snapvine. Challenge is a spell and Carnivorous Snapvine is an ability on a unit that both do the same thing in terms of spell ability damage. It's not the spell or ability dealing the damage, it's the spell or ability telling the player to choose 2 units and have them deal damage to each other. So that specific instance is not going to count as spell or ability damage. It counts as a spell or ability that tells you to make two things deal damage to each other. So when a card like Unyielding Spirit says prevent that spell or ability damage, it would not prevent Carnivorous Snapvine or Challenge from resolving and dealing that damage. And for the last card I want to go over today, there is more in this rules FAQ. We don't have time to go over every single piece of it today. Again, I do encourage you to read through this when you have some time. But I do want to talk about Teemo Strategist, because the way it was previously ruled, with the way that it was worded, when you flip or defend with Teemo Strategist, you could target up to 5 different units and then reveal the top 5 cards of your deck, deal 1 damage to any of those ones that you targeted up to 5 times based on how many cards you revealed from hidden. This is getting completely changed in several ways. Firstly, they're getting rid of the entire when I'm played from hidden part of the effect, because it's now going to be understood that at any time a unit is defending a battlefield, whether it was the start of that showdown or in the middle of that showdown, it's going to be considered a defender. So when you play Teemo Strategist from hidden at a battlefield you are defending, it doesn't need to say when I'm played from hidden, because it's understood that it's a defender, and when it's flipped as being a defender, its effect is going to go on to the chain. So it's going to now say, when I defend, choose an enemy unit here and reveal the top 5 cards of your main deck. Deal 1 to that unit for each card with hidden revealed this way, then recycle the revealed cards. This is much more clearly written than the way it was previously written, which says, when I defend or I'm played from hidden, reveal the top 5 cards of your main deck. Deal 1 to an enemy unit here for each card with hidden, then recycle them. That part that says deal 1 to an enemy unit here, you could take that to mean plural or singular. Like, does it load all the damage onto 1, or does it load all the damage onto any number of units of your choice? And how does that work for targeting? Do you have to target 5 units at the time this is added to the chain, or can you choose 5 units after it's resolving? It didn't really make sense. This is much more clear, but they're really completely functionally changing how this card's going to work. So for any of my Teemo players out there, definitely keep your eye on this one. All right, guys, there you have it. That's the entire rules FAQ, at least the really key things that I thought were important to know that we went over in today's video. Again, there is more there than just what I went over. So if I didn't mention something that you think is really important, let me know in the comments below. But again, please do take the time to read through this FAQ if you're going to be playing Riftbound, either as a hobby or as a competitive player. One more thing I do want to keep in your mind, guys. There's going to be players showing up to your locals playing Riftbound for the first time. They're not going to have heard anything about these erratas. They're going to show up with the decks they wanted to build, and they're going to read what their cards do, and they're going to try to play them as their cards read. Let's not blame new players for that, because that's only going to prevent new players from actually trying and joining our game. Please just have a little bit of grace when players show up not really fully understanding the rules, not fully understanding cards and erratas. Point them to the proper resources to understand those rules and erratas, but don't, belittle or make fun or shame someone for not knowing, because we want more and more people to play this game. That's how it's going to grow, and that's how we're going to have bigger events, bigger tournaments, more cards, more sets, and more of the things we want out of this community. So with that being said, hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. I'll catch up with you guys on Monday, probably for a tournament report, and we'll see you then.